Welcome to Write to Publish, your go-to podcast for all things writing and publishing. I'm Karen Stanley, a 14 times published author and the founder of Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Join me as I share a multitude of tips and insights drawn from my own writing and publishing journey. We'll be hearing from some inspirational authors too, who will share their writing experiences and top tips for success. Each week, we'll learn about an aspect of writing, from composition to genre and from publishing to marketing. Listen in as we learn and chat about all things writing and publishing, and let's get you on the right path.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Write to Publish with me, your host Karen Stanley. It's lovely to have you all with me here today. And today we're going to talk about elevating your writing quality. So we're going a little bit beyond the basics today, and we're going to really talk about the things that are going to sharpen your storytelling, refine your craft, hone your writing skills, because it's all very well writing a story, but you want to really take your prose, you want to take your narrative to a level that really engages, hooks your readers, and get readers begging for more. Really, you want them to become so engrossed in your story that they never want to leave. And really, if you want to take your prose to the next level, this is the episode for you, because we're going to be talking about some advanced writing techniques that will make your words leap off the page and into the imaginations of your reader. We're going to be talking about sentence variation, powerful imagery, and pacing strategies that will keep your readers hooked. I go on and on and on. My mentees will tell you about pacing. It's so important. Pace isn't just about speed. It's about keeping the story moving. And that includes places where you slow it down a little bit and places where you speed it up a little bit. But the important thing is that your story never flatlines, that your reader always wants to read more. Every word you use should do something for your story. And if you use a lot of words that are doing nothing for your story or are not moving your story along, you've got to ask yourself whether they're really necessary. They may sometimes be good for description, but, again, these are things I've talked about. You don't want so much description that it turns your reader off, really, or gets them lost. They wonder where they're going with it. So let's talk about sentence variation now. One of the best and quickest ways to elevate your writing is by mastering sentence variation. If your sentences all follow the same rhythm, your writing can feel really monotonous. And the trick here is to mix things up, quite simply. So to vary the length, the structure and the style of your sentences. There's a brilliant piece of writing by Gary Prost, I think it is. And he talks about the power of sentence variation through the 5-word sentence, and how if you write in 5-word sentences all the time, it can become quite dull and quite boring. If you visit my Mabel and Stanley publishing page, I'll try and pop that up for you as a visual. And it's all about how you can hear it when you read it aloud. You can really hear how varying your sentence structure can really add dynamics to your writing. So if you pop on over to the Mabel and Stanley publishing page, give us a follow, give us a like, and I will post that piece of writing for you. I think it's a brilliant way to showcase exactly what I mean by sentence variation. It's hugely important. Okay, so here we go. So, for example, consider this passage. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. She walked into the room. The light was dim. She felt nervous. Now, not only is that literally just telling you what's happening, and again, we've talked in lots of episodes about the importance of show, don't tell appropriately. Not so much that it becomes overflowery, but enough that your reader is engaged. So if you talk something like, she stepped into the dimly lit room, her heart hammering. Shadows stretched across the walls, distorting shapes and making her pulse quicken. So if you notice in the first sentence, in the first passage, there were 3 sentences, and each one was sort of 3 or 4 words long. So it's very short, staccato, a bit bitty. Now, there will be sometimes, again, all of this stuff, it's quite difficult because you'll say one thing and then completely contradict yourself. Now, there may be times in your writing when you use a really short dynamic sentence. So perhaps you've used a long, kind of quite flowery, in-depth, descriptive sentence. And then you might do something like the clock stopped or time stood still. I'm a bit cliched, but you understand what I mean. You've got this long sort of descriptive passage and then you've got this short staccato sentence in between. And I think that's the important thing. What you want to do is you want a mixture. It's like a piece of music, and the Gary Prost piece of writing will really demonstrate that. In a piece of music, sometimes the pauses are as important as the notes. And that's really like writing. You almost want it to become rhythmic and lyrical. So you can see the difference between she walked into the room, the light was dim, she felt nervous. She stepped into the dimly lit room, her heart hammering. Shadows stretched across the walls, distorting shapes and making her pulse quicken. So you've really started to elongate those sentences, which means the reader's got to invest more and become more engrossed. So by changing the sentence length and adding sensory details, this is where we come back to show, don't tell, the scene will instantly feel a bit more immersive and dynamic, so the reader will become more engrossed. And as I said before, if you want tension, then by all means add some short punchy sentences to really make the reader kind of sit up and go, oh crikey, wasn't expecting that, or that was really powerful, or oh my god, I didn't expect that to happen. That's what you're wanting to create. And then your longer, more flowing sentences will create, as I said before, like a lyrical, immersive feel, almost, as I said, like a piece of music. It's got highs, it's got lows, it's got changes in tempo, changes in key. Sometimes a little bit of key change will really kind of ratchet up your writing. So start to play with the structure. Start with a clause or flip or subject verb order. Try rhetorical questions to engage the reader. A rhetorical question is a question that doesn't require an answer. A bit like your mum when you were a kid. Are you going to tidy up that bedroom? She doesn't really want an answer. What she wants you to do is just get on and do it. But sometimes, was he ever going to feel the same as he did before? You don't really want an answer, but it's asking you to ask that question. It's asking you to delve back into that writing and think, do you know what? Is this going to get any better for this character? Is there anything that's going to happen that's going to make his fortunes turn, etc.? So all of those kinds of things can start to play around with the structure and will really engage your reader a lot more. So now let's talk about strong imagery. And I talk about this a lot, and I'm sure you've talked about the power of imagery, and we're going back here to the advice, show, don't tell. So let's talk about what does that actually mean? And I've sort of touched on it briefly in this episode already, but instead of stating facts, you want to create a sensory experience for your reader. So our brain loves to make links. So if I say to you, it is autumn, it is cold, I am fed up, I haven't got to make any links there. You're just spoon feeding me the information. And eventually my brain will switch off. I'll get a bit bored. I think, oh God, they're just going to tell me what I'm doing anyway. So I don't really need to work at it. The truth is our brain really likes to make those links. So, red leaves crunched underfoot, the cold wind bit at his cheeks. He hung his head low as he trudged through the park. You get the idea. The point is, I'm then having to make the links between the red leaves of on the ground and then being part of autumn because of what I already know about autumn. So let's think about it. The coffee was hot. The steam, as opposed to, the steam curled upward, carrying the rich scent of roasted beans. The first sip scalded her tongue, sending a jolt of warmth through her veins. Now, not once have I told you that the coffee was hot there, but you've made that connection knowing what you know about when something is steaming. Therefore, it must be hot. Knowing that when you sip something hot, it scalds your tongue, and the feeling of that, you might instantly start to feel that feeling on your tongue. It's worth noting here that our brains don't really distinguish between the actual experience and reading about the experience. So that's why sometimes if you read about, I don't know, a cold day, you might shiver, or, you know, you read about someone scalding their tongue, you might instantly, even without thinking about it, put your tongue to your teeth. I know I did there. So your brain doesn't really distinguish particularly between the actual experience and powerful imagery being fed to the brain, i.e. your writing. So that's why it's really important to get the imagery right. And as I say, once again, I've not told you once that the coffee's hot, but you instantly know because of all of those connections and links that you're starting to make. And what we've done there is we've engaged smell, touch and taste. So therefore, as I said just now, we're making that experience more tangible because our brain is making links between how that smells, how that tastes, how that touches, how it feels. And, you know, there with the steam curled up and the rich scent, there's the smell, the sip scalded her tongue, there's the taste, you know, the feel, the jolt of warmth through her veins. So what we're doing there is we're engaging all the five senses wherever possible. Now, you might not need to engage hearing for a cup of coffee because a cup of coffee doesn't do much and it doesn't make an awful lot of sound unless you've got someone very noisy slurping it next to you, which drives me a little bit crazy, I have to say. But yeah, you want to engage those five senses, but only where appropriate. So obviously, if the thing that you're writing about doesn't make a sound, don't try and put that in there because you'll just lose the power of the other imagery that you've got. So use the five senses where appropriate. Charles Dickens was the master of this. So read a few things by Charles Dickens. I think it was from Great Expectations. There's a gorgeous passage about the town and the red brick and the putrid smell from the river that ran through the town. It's brilliant imagery. You can feel the Victoriana of the scene, you know, the industrialized feeling of that period, the smoke, the pollution, the kind of depression of the life that people were living. So, you know, anything by Dickens, he's a bit of a master of that. So you definitely can use metaphors and similes, but try to avoid cliches where you can. So be specific, you know, instead of a tree, you could describe a towering oak with rough gnarled bark. A bit over the top, but you get the idea. I know in one of my poems, I think I described trees as tall sentries lining the path like guards on duty or something like that. But, you know, I didn't once say they were trees. The tree isn't a soldier, but they do stand upright and straight and tall and still like a soldier. So you get the idea. Those similes and metaphors, again, making our brains work even harder for that information and instantly creating powerful imagery. As I was writing the soldiers, the trees as soldiers or sentries, I instantly thought of silver birch trees, because I don't know if you remember what a silver birch tree looks like. Obviously, they're silver in colour, but they're very, very tall. They don't have many leaves on the trunk, and they're sort of quite rigid, so and straight. So that was why when I was talking about the trees as sentries, instantly I got an image in my mind of these silver birch trees lining a pathway into a woodland. And obviously then I got a bit of imagery about changing of the guards and the soldiers lining, is it the Pall Mall near Buckingham Palace. So that was what was going on in my mind when I wrote it. And that, I hope, is what will go on in my reader's mind when they read it. So now, finally, let's get on to pacing. Really, really important. Pacing is what keeps your reader turning the pages, quite frankly. Too slow, they'll get bored. Too fast, they'll feel overwhelmed. I'll think, oh my God, I've missed something. I don't know what's going on. It's like, you know, if you watch a film and it kind of races through, or they speak really quickly, I hate that. And I think, God, I don't know what they said. What did they say? Me and my husband spend this whole time going, what did they say? What did they say? And that nothing turns me off quicker than that, because I think, well, I'm having to work too hard to get this because everything's moving too fast. So the key to this is knowing when to speed it up and when to slow it down. And that really only comes with practice. It's teach pace, but you'll know when you read something, whether it's moving too fast or whether it's moving too slow. And the only thing that will help you with that will be practice. But again, as I've said always before, read something and think, do you know what? God, that's slow and dull. Or, oh my Lord, that's gone so fast, I don't know what's happening. Or this is quite right, I can't put it down. I don't want it to stop. I'm loving it. But I'm really enjoying it, but I don't want it to stop. I'm really into it. So read some books and read it like a writer and think, do you know what, which were the ones where the pace was good, where it was too slow, it was too fast, and how did the writer achieve that? So you want to think of it a bit like a roller coaster. So you want moments of calm before the plunge and heart-pounding acceleration just at the right times. So, obviously anything you read where there's tension, like horror or spooky stories, if they do that right, Stephen King's a bit of the master of this, he'll get it just right. It's all about the pacing. So for action scenes, you want to be using short sentences and strong verbs. And you want to avoid unnecessary adverbs. So he ran, the footsteps behind him grew louder. He turned the corner, dead end. Don't need to say anything, yeah? Adverbs, we basically mean quickly, slowly, excitedly, hurriedly. Stephen King, massively not a fan of adverbs. In fact, he says they should be banned. But I can't really comment on that, but I do get what it means. If I'd have said he ran quickly rather than he ran, full stop, he ran quickly, it does lose its power. Okay, you don't need to say that, because effectively running implies that you're moving quickly anyway. So you're almost over egging the pudding, if that would be possible. Think about emotional moments. So slow down and linger on the details. So for example, if you're trying to convey emotion, she traced the rim of the teacup with her finger, remembering the last time she had sat at this table, the sound of his laughter still lingering in her mind. So there, you're really wanting the reader to slow down, to ponder, to think about how that character is feeling as the author there is developing that character, okay? So the character is becoming less one-dimensional as well in that moment. We're thinking about, and the questions that should be raised with that should be, why? Why is she, thinking of the sound of his laughter? The fact that she's tracing the rim of the teacup, remembering, it kind of shows that she's slowed down. She's deep in thought. Why is she deep in thought? What has happened to the person that she is struggling to remember, or looking forward to remembering, or enjoying remembering, or feeling sad at remembering? All of that stuff happens because you've slowed the reader down. But also, it's not unnecessary detail. It's although it's slower, it's still very necessary to that passage because you're conveying emotion rather. So I hope that makes sense. And also, think about dialogue. Use dialogue to break up long passages of description and to keep the reader engaged, and keep your conversation snappy and meaningful. We'll do another episode on dialogue tags, and I think there has been an episode before on dialogue tags. These really can affect pace. You don't want too many he said, she said, he whispered, she laughed, he chuckled, they giggled, they mumbled. It just slows everything down. So, keeping your dialogue quite sort of snappy and meaningful, avoiding dialogue tags when it's quite obvious who's speaking and you don't need them, so that you don't clutter up that writing. And again, not allowing your characters to waffle on. We don't need them to say, oh yeah, I remember that, yeah, okay, yeah, that's good, yeah, okay, unless that's really indicative of the way your character speaks, or the fact that you're trying to convey that your character is a bit dull and kind of repeats themselves and takes ages to say anything. You don't really want all of that inconsequential language in there, because it just slows it right down and it becomes a little bit, he said sit down, she said oh okay then, and he said well why don't you sit over there, and she said oh shall I sit in that chair? You see what I mean? It kind of gets really like, oh for goodness sake, get on with it. So there is a real skill to that, and again, as I've said, it takes practice. That's the only way you're going to get it. So to recap for today, master your sentence variation, and that will keep your prose fresh. Use strong imagery to make your scenes vivid, and control your pacing, and this will keep your readers engaged. Like I've said several times, these techniques will take practice, but once you start to integrate them into your writing, I promise you, you will see a marked improvement. And I've said before, read. Look at how read like a writer. Read how the writer does that in your favourite books. How do they keep you engaged? How do they keep things pacey? How do they keep things moving along without getting too bogged down in unnecessary detail? So thank you for joining me on Write to Publish today. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review or your thoughts or your questions. I love hearing from you all. And if you do have any questions on this topic or topics that you'd like me to cover in future episodes, for example, or something that you've had a little try of in the things that we've discussed today, do reach out to me. I'm on all the social media platforms at Mabel and Stanley Publishing, or you can get through to me on my website, mabelandstanleypublishing.com, or drop me an email, karen@mabelandstanleypublishing.com. Always happy to engage, always happy to answer your questions, and always happy to help. I feel honoured to be a part of your writing journey, whatever that may look like for you. So till next time, keep writing, keep refining, keep pushing those limits of your creativity, and let's get you on the right path.